Alright, this is Andrea Jang's second video assignment. Good afternoon, Jim. Welcome back. How are you doing today?
Oh, doing fine, thanks, Andrea.
Good. And how's the family been?
Oh, they're doing great. Daughters are really busy at school doing their school assignments, and actually my wife is enrolled in some online courses related to her work right now.
So last day we talked about some changes that were happening at BCIT. We took some time to explore the context of your situation, as well as look at some of the feelings that were associated with these changes. And then we started to look at some options around these changes. Would it be okay if we continued on from this point?
Yeah, well, that's fine. That's
Okay.
fine.
Alright, so what I'd like to look at today is the problem-solving model. So there's 4 steps involved in this model. The first step is to define a problem, which involves looking at the problem description as well as the problem definition. So last day we looked at the problem description, which involves looking at the context of your problem. And today we'll look at the problem definition, which involves looking at how you'd like your problem to be different. The second step is we're going to start to brainstorm some possible options. We'll look at the pros and cons, and then we will evaluate them in terms of their feasibility. The third step is to come up with an action plan. And then the fourth step is to evaluate your action plan, which we'll probably not get to today. How does that sound to you?
Sounds great. Let's get started.
Okay. Alright. So I'm curious, have you had any experience working with the problem-solving model before?
Well, I've had a bit of experience with problem-solving models at work. I don't know if it's directly related to this, but it was problem-solving.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you've had some exposure to the problem-solving model then. Would you be alright with applying this problem-solving model to your current situation?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Alright. And would you be okay if I took a few notes while we're chatting?
No, that's fine, Andrea.
Okay. Alright. So let's look at the first step, which is defining the problem. So during last day's session, we started looking at 3 options. So looking at them, I recall them being status quo, looking for a similar job with your current qualifications, and getting a degree. So I'm curious, have you had any other thoughts since last day's session?
Well, it's really been a lot to process, and I've been chatting with some of my co-workers and trying to get their thoughts on the situation.
Describe for me, how did these conversations go?
Well, talking with my co-worker Ron, and he's supportive of me going back to school and getting a degree, and then Ron's been through various adult education programs, and right now he holds a master's degree in adult education. So Ron has said that he would act as a mentor if I did choose to get a degree. And I spoke with the dean, Mike, and he's said he's supportive of me pursuing a degree as an option, and he's willing to make a combination to my workload and scheduling. But at the same time, he said that he doesn't like the sudden shift in human resource policy, and he said that if I choose to stay in my current position, he's willing to back me up because he believes that I should be grandfathered, given all my practical experience.
Right. So it sounds like at this point the decision could go either way. You have support from your coworkers in terms of their mindsets and their potential resources. During last year's session you mentioned family. How does family factor into your decision?
Well, my wife knows that I really like my job. I like working with the students. And she's always said that she would support me if I did go back to school. And, you know, she's aware of the sacrifices involved. We've talked about that, and she's willing to pick up more of the responsibilities at home. But, you know, I think the key thing is that she says that she feels it's important to stay at BCIT in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Talked with my daughters, and they know that whatever decision I make is a big one, and they just said that they just want me to be happy. So.
Right. So, like your co-workers, it sounds like your family wants to be supportive of you and wants you to be happy. Tell me the impressions that these conversations have left on you.
You know, really, I guess I'm not too sure. Tough one to answer, because knowing that my co-workers and family are supportive of whatever route I choose, really makes it hard to know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're not leaning one way or the other at this point.
What might be some possible barriers to this decision?
Well, I look at it and say, hey, you know, it's a major decision at this point in my life, and I just want to feel confident that the decision I'm making is the right one. And I think I'm still a little bit, fearful, maybe is the way to describe it.
Tell me a little bit more about this fear.
Well, it's similar to what we talked about in our last session. It's the fear of the unknown, and I feel that there's so much riding on this decision. I want to know that the outcome of the decision is going to be a good one.
Right. So it sounds like you're feeling fearful around what the future potentially holds. So this is how you're currently feeling. Would it be alright if we took some time to explore how you might be feeling in the future?
Oh, sure.
Okay. So this might be kind of a bit of a crazy question, but if you were to suddenly wake up in the morning and your situation was suddenly resolved, how would things look different from how they're currently looking?
Well, there would definitely be less uncertainty around my current work situation. I think I'd have a better sense of security in my job, knowing that I've got the required qualifications. And I guess it would, lastly, give me the confidence to act if there are any changes in my work situation in the future.
Right. Well, thank you for taking this risk for me and looking into the future. So before we can proceed, what we need to do is to get agreement on the problem definition so that we can be on the same page. So what I think I'm hearing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to be working on this together, is the problem definition is that there have been some changes to your work situation, but you'd like to have more security in your job and more confidence in your qualifications. Does this problem definition sound accurate to you?
Yeah, that sounds fairly accurate.
Okay. All right. So I just want to quickly pause here because I know we've gone through quite a bit working through that problem definition. How are you finding the process so far with working through the problem-solving model?
It's fine. I'm following along in the pace is fine.
Okay. All right. So with our problem definition in mind, what I'd like to do next is some brainstorming. So with brainstorming, what we're going to do is we're going to list as many options as we can. And at this point, I don't want to evaluate or rank anything. We'll do that in the next step. Does that sound all right with you?
That's fine.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to write this part down if that's okay. So what are some possible options that come to your mind when you think about your situation?
Well, I mean, it goes back to what we spoke about in the previous session there, and we brainstormed the three options,
Okay.
and you've already mentioned them, but keeping things status quo,
Okay.
looking for a similar job that doesn't require a degree, or pursuing a degree.
Okay. All right. Are there any other options that come to your mind?
No, that's all I can think of at the moment.
Okay. All right. So I have three options listed here. You told me that there's status quo, looking for a similar job with your current qualifications, and getting a degree. So I just wanted to back up a little bit. When you say a degree, are you referring to a bachelor's degree or a master's degree?
Well, I think in the short term, I'd be looking at a bachelor's degree, but in the long term, I may set my sights on getting a master's degree.
Okay, all right. So the status quo, looking for a similar job, and getting a bachelor's degree. Okay, so let's move on to the next step, which involves evaluating these options. So what we're going to do with evaluating is looking at some of the pros and cons associated with each option, and kind of seeing what might be the best fit in terms of your goal, which you told me is having more job security and having more confidence in your job qualifications. Would this work for you?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, so out of the three options that we've listed, which option would you like to look at first?
Let's start with the status quo.
Okay, so with status quo and remaining at BCIT, what might be some potential advantages?
Well, I think the thing about staying with my current job, it puts me in a familiar work environment at BCIT. Okay. So, like I'm in my comfort zone. And as I've mentioned, I really enjoy teaching and working with my students. And the other thing too is I've established a really good rapport with a lot of my co-workers, and I don't want to suddenly have to sever these relationships.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, so it sounds like you've established yourself well in terms of your job position and your relationships. Is this accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. What might be some potential drawbacks to remaining at BCIT?
Well, like we've been talking about, it's number one is job security. I mean, I feel I'm always vulnerable to being laid off. Another thing I kind of thought about too is there's that potential of stagnating in my career. In other words, without a degree, I may not be able to apply for the positions at BCIT as they come up.
Right, right. So I remember last session you were talking about some changes. I'm just wondering if this vulnerability that you're talking about is related to these changes.
It is. It's really related to the ongoing budget cuts at BCIT.
Right, right. How do you think these budget cuts would affect your position specifically?
Well, what they do is they review the budgets on an annual basis at BCIT, and because the forest industry in general has been on a decline for the past several years, it really makes the entire forestry program at BCIT vulnerable to elimination.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Summarizing the first option, what you've told me is that you really enjoy working at BCIT. You really value the relationships that you've made with your coworkers, and and your friends. However, so the potential drawbacks might be job security with the budget cuts. Would it be okay if we transitioned here and looked at the second option, which is looking at a similar job with your current qualifications?
Oh, sure, that's fine.
Okay. So what might be some potential benefits of looking for a similar job?
You know, Andrea, the only benefit is that I wouldn't have to invest my time and money in going back to school.
Okay, so it sounds like you wouldn't have to reestablish yourself and start all over again in terms of your career.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay. All right. What do you think some of the potential drawbacks might be to looking for a similar job?
Well, I'd have to move away from BCIT, and I lose all my seniority, and I've been there for quite a few years now. The other thing is that depending where I go, I may not be able to contribute to the college pension plan anymore, and that pension plan to me at this stage in life is pretty important.
Right. And then what about the relationships with your co-workers and your friends?
You know, I guess it's tough to sever those ties when I leave.
Right, okay, so that might be another potential drawback. Okay, so if I was going to summarize what you told me around the second option, is that some of the advantage would be that you wouldn't have to reestablish yourself in terms of your career. But then some of the potential drawbacks would be that you would lose your seniority, you would potentially lose out on the opportunity to contribute to the college pension plan, and then you'd have to let go of those relationships with your coworkers and your friends in some capacity. Is that fairly accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Would you be okay if we transition to the third option then of getting a bachelor's degree?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. So what do you think some of the potential benefits might be of getting a bachelor's degree?
Well, it definitely give me more security in my job position at BCIT. And I feel that with a degree, my students would benefit, because with a degree I'd probably be able to share more of my knowledge, share in different ways with them.
Right.
And you know, the other things too is that with a degree there's a slight pay increase.
Right.
There at BCIT, and there's that flexibility then of being able to apply for other jobs as they may arise.
Okay, so what I think I hear you tell me is that getting a bachelor's degree would allow you to advance in terms of your career and provide some opportunities to develop professionally. Describe to me what this professional development would mean to you.
Well, you know, professional development is really important to me because I value keeping up to date with my current teaching practices. Okay.
All right. And from what I recall, last time you had mentioned how much you value your job, so it sounds like this professional development would really allow you to take the pride in your work. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Correct.
Good. All right. What might be some potential drawbacks to getting your bachelor's degree?
Well, the only drawback, and I don't know if it's an issue, Andrea, is that I think it may be a little bit stressful going back to school as a mature student. Also, I mean, really there's no guarantee of job security at BCIT, even with a degree, but it certainly put me in a better position to avoid any potential layoffs and advance in my career.
Right. Okay, so to summarize the third option, you told me some of the advantages would be that it would allow you to advance in your career, potentially give you some more pay, but then some of the drawbacks might be having to work through some of the fear associated with being a mature student, and also the potential that even going through everything, it might not give you that ultimate protection from the job cuts at BCIT. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, it does. It sums it up very nicely.
Okay, all right. So what I'd like to do now is to look at evaluating some of the options. What I'd like to do is we've evaluated, we've looked at the pros and cons. What I'd like to look at now is to look at ranking each option. And the reason I'd like to rank them is just so that, if you're working through your action plan, you don't find something quite works, then you have a plan B to fall back on. Would that be all right with you?
Oh, sure, that's fine.
So, which option do you think might be your top choice?
Hate to say it, but I'm still not sure. I'm still a little bit undecided.
Right. Okay. Well, if we go back to what we talked about at the beginning of the session, I had you kind of do that fictitious situation where you imagined your situation suddenly being resolved, and what you told me you'd like to be different is to have more job security and to have more confidence in your job qualifications. So if we looked at it from that perspective, which option might be your top choice?
Well, if you look at it from that perspective, then I'd definitely say getting a degree is the number one choice.
Okay. So getting your bachelor's degree seems like it'd be your top choice. How would the other options fall in line? How would you rank them?
Well, if you have to rank them 1, 2, 3, then it would be number
This
1
down.
is getting
Okay.
a degree.
Okay.
Number 2 is keeping things status quo.
Okay.
And number 3 is looking for a different job.
Okay. All right. So we've taken some time to rank your options. So you told me your top option would be getting a bachelor's degree, followed by remaining at BCIT, and then looking for a similar job. So now that we've ranked all 3 of these options, what I'd like to do now is to come up with an action plan. So with the action plan, what that involves is looking at what the potential steps might be, who might be involved, as well as attaching a loose timeline around that. Would that work for you?
Sure.
Okay. So thinking about your top option of getting a bachelor's degree, what might be some of the first steps that you need to take?
Well, now I have a sense of where we're going with this, so I'll probably talk further to my friend Ron about some of the specifics about getting a degree, and I can probably start to do a little research on the program prerequisites, sources of PD funding, and think about a schedule for completing a degree.
So when do you think you might be able to talk to your friend, Ron?
Well, I see Ron on a daily basis, so I can ask him to set aside a specific time
Okay.
in the next week when we can talk about this.
Okay. What might be some other steps that you would need to take?
Well, I think just like we were talking about is researching the available programs, PD funding, and program prerequisites.
Right. And how long do you think that might potentially take?
Well, I think completing research on the programs and the PD funding, probably the next 3 weeks is a reasonable time frame.
Okay. Okay. All right. So what you told me with your action plan so far is that you would like to talk with your friend Ron, and you hope to do that within the next week. And you also told me that you'd like to do some preliminary research on your own, which you hope to have completed within the next 3 weeks. Does that sound fairly doable for you?
Yeah, no, that sounds very reasonable.
Okay. All right. Well, we only have about a minute or so left in our session, so I'd like to quickly recap what we've talked about. So what you shared with me is that your top option would be to get a bachelor's degree. And this option seems to fit the best with your ultimate goal, which is to have more job security and greater confidence in your job qualifications. Your action plan around that would be to talk to your friend Ron within the next week, to do some preliminary research on your own within the next 3 weeks. Does that sound like a fairly accurate summary?
Yeah, that sums it up
Okay.
quite nicely.
Okay. Well, why don't we schedule another appointment in the next month? And would it be okay if we touch base on how your action plan is going then?
Yeah, no, I'll make sure I have some
Okay.
stuff for you.
Good, good. All right, well, thank you for coming in and the time that you've spent working with me. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.